Canon's 15 to 35 millimeter f2.8 is the world's best ultra-wide zoom lens for several reasons, but first, let's take a look at some of the pictures I can make with it. This picture is an example of why this is so wonderful. It's the world's widest f2.8 lens that you can put a filter on the front of, which means it's the world's widest f2.8 lens that's practical to shoot. I don't care if you can get 24 to 14 or 24 to 12 millimeter lenses or 24 to 11 millimeter lenses that you can't put a filter on, because if you can't put a protective filter on the front, you can't walk around with these things and throw them around and actually shoot them on a daily basis on a reliable thing. Those become special purpose lenses. So this is the widest. It's also the fastest at f2.8, but it's also, without question, extremely sharp. I've never seen a sharper ultra wide lens. Here's a torture test. This shot is at 21 millimeters wide open at f2.8. And as I'm slowly zooming in here with my software in video, this is a still image shot on Canon's EOS RP, you'll see it's still ultra sharp in the far corner. And that is an incredible torture test for lens. Honestly, 10 years ago, there was no ultra wide lens that can do this wide open and remain that sharp in the corner, because they were all designed for film, which was much more forgiving. And also wide open, the lenses would have a lot of fall off and be dark, so you really couldn't see that they were soft and fuzzy in the corners, and that was a limit of technology. This lens really astounds me. Here's another shot at a reasonable aperture, and again, it's just super sharp, 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 sharp. And it is so practical that this becomes the world's best ultra wide zoom. Back here to the lens. It's a large lens. This is probably also the largest practical ultra wide zoom. Again, when I say practical, I have to emphasize that it takes a conventional screw-in filter. When you can use a screw-in filter, you can shoot this day to day and not worry about screwing up the front of your lens. You'll see as I'm working here, dust keeps appearing on this front element, which we can see here at 4K resolution, and I can't keep getting it off. Try doing that. You really don't want to touch the front element ever. You always want to have a protective filter on it, as I always do. Then you can clean these, and if you ever destroy this filter, then you throw it away, you buy a new one. The key is with an 11 or 12 or 14 millimeter ultra wide end that is a large fishbowl style front element that won't take a filter. Those are lenses you have to use sparingly. You take them out of their case and you shoot a real estate job with them, and you're very careful, but you can't just sling them around your neck and go out shooting, as we can with this. When they came out with the 17 to 35, I was astounded. I didn't think that was possible, and it wasn't until Canon invented it. Then they came out with the 16 to 35 2.8, and it was insane. Now we can go 15 to 35 f2.8 with a filter on the front, and oh, did I mention it's also got image stabilization, Canon's first f2.8 ultra wide with image stabilization. Again, this thing just hits it out of the park. The front element is extremely aspherical. Let me show you how the reflections look. You see that? This is a very complex and difficult to manufacture front element, which is how, and this lens has several of these ultra spherical lenses in them, gets its high performance. The stabilization works great. It's ultra sharp at every setting. It's a practical lens. It also has super fast autofocus. The autofocus is essentially immediate no matter what you do, which is typical for ultra wide lenses. This lens also has the best image stabilization I've ever tested. It has superb Sunstars. It has crud resistance fluorine coatings. Mind you, it's certainly collecting dust here because the electrostatics involved. I keep on having to clean it as I'm shooting here, but it also should resist fingerprints, but I'm not going to test it. We have a mechanical zoom ring. We have this, which is usually focus, and this, which is usually click stopped for a function. You can pay Canon to remove the click stops if you like. Also, it's a quality product. It's made in Japan. It's not offshore to China or Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia or some other country like that. It's quality made in the country where it's designed and marketed from. So bless Canon for actually caring about quality and making things domestically. And also, it has the world's best support. Canon has, at least for the United States, the best support. Just pick up the phone, 1-800-OK-CANON, and the first person that picks up after I punch into the menu system to tell them what I'm calling about always knows the answer to my question right off the top of their head. They're skilled people that know photography, know their products, which is probably, along with Apple, the best customer service I've ever gotten. What's bad about this lens? Absolutely nothing. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about it. Other than the fact that it's big and it's heavy and it's expensive, the point is this lens actually dishes out the performance. There's plenty of other big, heavy lenses out there that don't work as well as this does. There's nothing missing. It comes with a plastic bayonet hood. It also comes with a case, And it has all 3 control rings. It only works on Canon's full-frame mirrorless cameras. You can't adapt this to any single-lens reflex camera simply because this goes right up to the image plane very closely. There's no room to put an adapter ring because you actually have to be closer inside the body than a single-lens reflex's mount already is. A single-lens reflex camera's mount goes out 10 or 20 millimeters more, so it just won't adapt that direction. Focus breathing. If you're a cinematographer, you don't want the image size changing as you're focusing in and out from one actor to the next. This lens's effect is really minor. It has very little focus breathing at 35 millimeters, but it does get strong at 15 millimeters. The image gets smaller as focused more closely. The bokeh, although it doesn't really matter with an ultra-wide lens because nothing gets that far out of focus. But here's a shot at 15 millimeters at f2.8, and the bokeh is only mediocre. But the bokeh refers to the quality of the defocus, not the amount of defocus. And here it is at 35 millimeters. It's fairly neutral. It's not really that exciting. The edges of the blur circles aren't that soft. It's just a good, well-designed lens. It's not designed for bokeh because it's not the lens you'd be shooting with. Let's face it. Are you really going to shoot a portrait with this lens and want a soft background? If you're shooting a portrait with this lens, it means you're deliberately trying to make the subject look like an idiot because their nose is going to get way too big and their ears are going to disappear, which is what happens when you photograph somebody from 2 feet away. The distortion, there's no visible distortion as you shoot it on most of their cameras, which have, by default, distortion correction enabled. If for some reason you're silly enough to turn off the distortion correction and then go measure it, don't come complaining to me, but it does have a moderate amount of barrel distortion at 15 millimeters. Wow, no news there. And a moderate amount of pincushion distortion at the 35 millimeter end, and the distortion is minimum at about 19 millimeters. Ergonomically, it's a great lens. Everything's where it needs to be. Big, beefy lens. This is an easy lens to love. Everything works as it should. There's no mysteries. Light fall off? Fall off isn't the problem. Here's a shot made at f2.8 wide open, and you'll see it looks just great. The corners get a little bit darker, but you want them to because pictures look weird if you actually have the corners exactly as bright as the center. This is made with the default fall-off correction in my camera. If you go out of your way to turn off the fall-off correction, you can get more. But, then you asked for it, so don't come complaining to me. You don't need thin filters. I can stack 3 standard screw-in filters and get no vignetting as wide as 18 millimeters. And if I want to stack 2 regular filters, I can go as wide as 16 millimeters with no vignetting on full frame. So you don't need to spend extra for extra thin polarizers or neutral density grads or the kind of filters you would use on this. Beware. Avoid using polarizers at the wide end because the angle of polarization in the sky varies as the angle of the sky varies. In other words, as you look from left to right in the sky, polarization varies. It's at the maximum 90 degrees away from the sun. This lens is so wide, if you use a polarizer, you're going to see dark bands in the sky as the sky's polarization changes. It's not the lens being weird, it's the sky being weird. So you don't really want to use a polarizer on this lens. There's no lateral color fringes on this lens if you have the digital lens optimizers all left on. If you're silly enough to go out of your way to turn off the correction in your camera and then look for it, there's a tiny amount of green magenta lateral color at 15 millimeters, and there's none from 23 to 35 millimeters. Macro performance is really good. This is as close as it gets at 35 millimeters. This is shot wide open at f2.8, and you'll see it's sharp at f2.8. These are zooms in on a still image in video editing. It's not actually zooming the lens here. I'm zooming in on the image so you can see detail. And at f8, it gets even sharper. Mechanically, it's mostly metal on the inside and mostly plastic on the outside. It's a very well-made lens. It's much better made than some of the shishi lenses from people like Zeiss or Sony that make a grummy plastic lens and put it in a vanity shell so it feels like metal on the outside, but on the inside it's all plastic. This lens is all plastic on the outside so your fingers don't stick to it in the Arctic in winter, but the insides are almost all metal, which is built the way a lens should be built. Spherochromatism is sometimes color fringes on highlights that are not in perfect focus. Spherochromatism with this lens is only minor. The background highlights get a little bit warm, and the foreground highlights might get a little bit cool in terms of color fringes, but it's actually extremely minor. Image stabilization is superb. I get 4 to 5 stops of real world improvement at 15 millimeters. I can shoot most of the time and get perfect tripod equivalent sharpness at a half a second handheld at 15 millimeters, a quarter of a second handheld at 35 millimeters, which is about a 3-stop improvement at 35 millimeters. Here's Sunstars, which again, one of the many reasons is when I don't like to say it, but I've been shooting over 50 years, so I've seen a lot of stuff. Rounded diaphragms are crummy for Sunstars, and Sunstars are important for pictures. Here we are. Here's at f2.8. Ignore the vertical smear. That's part of the sensor. That's not the lens. As I stop down here, by the time I get to about f8, I'm starting to get some nice Sunstars. And as we stop down towards the smaller apertures, and also bless this lens, it goes to f22. It doesn't chicken out and stop at f16. I can get beautiful Sunstars. And this is what sells pictures. People love to see a star on the sun because it tells you subconsciously that this is a really bright sun, as opposed to just being a white dot. So you'll notice the Sunstars are also real sharp at the small apertures. So that's great. It really helps you make fantastic images. How does it compare to the 16-35 f4 IS? Well, they both have IS. The key is the 16-35 f4 is a stop slower. It only goes to 16 versus 15 millimeters. You also have to use it with the adapter. And if you use it with the adapter, the size is about the same, but the weight is a lot less. The key is if you need f2.8 and you need stabilization, this new 15-35 is the only one Canon makes that does that. On the other hand, if you already own a 16-35 as I do, there's no real reason you have to buy another 15-35 unless you just like to buy gear. This EF lens works great, and it is super sharp, and it focuses really fast on the EOS R series of cameras. Although this lens does not focus as quietly. It still makes some sliding sounds as opposed to this new lens, the 15-35, that focuses silently. So that's it. If you deserve the very best and have an EOS R mirrorless camera, there is no ultra-wide lens better, regardless of brand or mount, than the Canon 15-35 millimeter. Thanks for watching Ken Rockwell, kenrockwell.com, and kenrockwell.tv.